All right, let's discuss the topic. Brock Purdy, man. Is this the end of the story, or is this going to continue? That's the question we all want to know. Is this Brock Purdy story for real? Is this going to be one of the most legendary stories of all time in all of sports? We'll know by Sunday. I get that he's the last pick in the draft, and I get that the expectation for Brock Purdy wasn't as high as people thought it was. He was just happy to make a roster. This went from a guy who was the last pick in the draft and came in as a guy who competed for a third string spot, and he outperformed Nate Sudfeld, who we paid $2 million to be our backup during the offseason. We were trying to look forward to moving on from Jimmy Garoppolo, but when we made that draft pick in last year, when we made that draft pick last year in the draft, it kind of seemed like he was a camp body. A guy who could probably just make the team and probably be on our practice squad. And then maybe if we like something, we probably put him into the contract for next year and all that stuff. But he kind of outperformed the expectation. What we saw in the preseason was a decent flash. He showed some poise. Everybody was calling him the little Jimmy Garoppolo and all that stuff. And I think that's what made his case to stick around the roster as a third string. So it was kind of interesting to keep this guy on the roster. But then again, the Niners, during the season, this is what was said. Trey Lance, we were fully high on. He was our guy. And he only lasted throughout 2 games. So when he played the Bears game, the narrative on him on that game was we lost to the Bears, and he didn't look too well. The following game against Seattle, he only played through 1 quarter against Seattle, broke his ankle. The narrative was all written off because when we brought back Jimmy Garoppolo, we brought him back before the regular season. So we found a way to restructure that contract. So when he was there, it was a sigh of relief for most of our fan base to have a guy who can win games, right? But he had a okay start when he went in against Seattle, and then when he played against Denver, he had a rocky start. He had his ups and downs, but then he was on a winning streak, So he was on a winning streak, and then the unfortunate situation that happened against the Dolphins. The moment that he was hurt, there was an area of concern about him, And then here comes this kid, Mr. Irrelevant, that comes off the bench, and you figure, oh God, this is going to be a long-ass season. But we have this team all around, dude. This is like crazy. How many teams go through injuries at that position? It's just mind-boggling, right? But you have a great defense. You have a great supporting cast around you. And it shouldn't be that difficult to succeed. So here comes this Mr. Irrelevant kid. Brock Purdy comes into the scene. Looks sharp against the Dolphins. But then people are wondering, what's he going to look like with a full week of preparation? He tested pretty well against the Buccaneers. How is he going to do on a short week against a team on the road? He tested pretty well against Seattle. How is he going to do against an actual good defense? He tested pretty well against the Commanders. What was he going to look like when he came from behind? He tested pretty well against a up-and-down Raiders team, and he won that game. We were down by 10 points, and he won that game. Bottom line. Then there was the questions after that. How's he going to do in the playoffs? It's a whole different ball game, right? So it's not easy to win against your divisional opponent for a third time, right? It's been a long time. The Niners broke that streak. They dominated Seattle and won that playoff game. People were wondering, how is he going to perform in the playoff stage? And then the next question was, how's he going to do against an actual team? He tested against the Dallas Cowboys and played pretty well. Not great, but good enough. Good enough to win games. He didn't turn the ball over. He didn't throw the touchdown, but he did enough to win. That's all that matters. When we look at the stat sheet, he doesn't need to be flashy, okay? He doesn't need to have that performance like he had against Seattle in the playoffs. He doesn't need to have 32 passing yards and 3 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. He doesn't need to have that consistently all the time. As long as we have a good running game and as long as our defense holds up, he should be able to win games. So that was what was said about him, you know. He's been answering the questions and he's been answering the narratives pretty much. So now there's the next question. How will he do in the playoffs on the road against the Eagles? Like, this is one of the best teams in the conference that we're going to face. And this can be the ultimate test that can definitely make it very interesting for Brock Purdy. So the question is this story going to run out? Or is it going to continue on till Super Bowl week? We'll find out about it, bro. But I'll tell you what, the Brock Purdy story, it's kind of becoming something legendary. There's a possibility we may see this movie come into Walt Disney, Netflix, or Hollywood. It's going to be one or the other. You'll want to have a story. They made a story out of Kurt Warner called The American Underdog. It's possible maybe Brock Purdy can rewrite history, but do it differently. In the previous years, there hasn't been a team to host a Super Bowl until the last 2 years. There hasn't been a rookie quarterback who hasn't been in the Super Bowl or started in the Super Bowl. And it's possible we may see a different history. So we'll find out this Sunday. But I'm telling you, don't sleep on Brock Purdy. This can be his chance to silence the doubters. It's okay to write him off. He's the last pick in the draft for a reason because nobody gave him a chance until Kyle Shanahan did. So you're going to see. And I think Kyle Shanahan deserves Coach of the Year. How do you make the most out of a third-string quarterback who was the last pick in the draft? And he does a spectacular job. So that's beyond me. But as always, I'm keeping you guys posted, and go Niners.